One of the seediest of Australian gangsters of the 20th century was a man named George Wallace. He was sometimes politely referred to by the press as the Midnight Terror or the Midnight Raider, but sometimes they would use his actual nickname, the Midnight Rapist. Wallace, who eventually grew to weigh 20 stone and was said to have been a wrestler at one time, gained his moniker from his habit of sexually assaulting the prostitutes he preyed upon. Late at night he would sneak into their rooms and assault them. Additionally, he would rape women in parks, laneways and shop doors at night. Women in the Redfern area of Sydney were terrorised by his presence. Aside from also being a thief, pickpocket, conman and dope peddler, he was also a standover man, a bloke with multiple talents in mischief. Wallace was born sometime around 1903 in Victoria. He was 5'7", of a stout build with light brown hair and brown eyes. In court in Brisbane in 1925, he claimed that he had been sent to jail in 1918 for 1 month for stealing. Aside from a couple of convictions for resisting arrest, he had otherwise been a perfect citizen. However, he made those remarks at the same time as he denied he knew that 2 warrants for his arrest were pending from Melbourne. He also neglected to mention that he had been on trial for shooting at men in Adelaide only a few months before. Maybe he had a bad memory. He certainly had trouble recalling his name, using the aliases of Harris, Wallace with an S, Roberts, Buckingham, Walsh, Franklin, Matthews, and Jack Ryan. He was arrested for his role in a sly grog operation in Sydney in 1920. On the 13th of May 1920, he broke into the home of James Pickles in Newcastle and stole a revolver and other articles. He was confronted by Pickles, who shot him twice when Wallace reached into his pocket. Although Wallace fell, he continued to fumble for a gun, so Pickles told him he still had 2 shots in his weapon, and if he moved another inch, he would shoot him again. Wallace put up his hands and said, "You got me, mate." Around July 1924, Wallace made a visit to Adelaide. While in Adelaide, Wallace had stayed at the Crown Inn in Curry Street. During this time he had an altercation with a lodger living there named Harold Wilton Panton. On the 12th of August 1924, while 4 or 5 men, including Panton, were having a drink at the bar, Wallace and another man entered. The 2 men exchanged words before Wallace drew a pistol from his pocket and snarled, "I'll blow your brains out, you." He then fired 2 shots, one of them embedding itself in the wall between Panton and another man sitting nearby. Wallace and his mate left when police were summoned. At 5:15 p.m. the same day, Wallace was arrested by a trio of detectives at a cafe in nearby Hindley Street and charged with having feloniously discharged a revolver with intent to murder Panton. By the time the case reached court on the 20th of August, the witnesses in the bar mysteriously changed their minds about the intentions of Wallace. J.W. Nelligan, the lawyer acting for Wallace, asked that in fairness to his client that the charges be dismissed. He claimed Wallace was drunk and had not meant to harm anyone. The charge was downgraded to wantonly discharging a firearm, for which he was fined £2 with 10 shillings cost. Wallace's brush with the law did not chasten him one iota. Just 5 weeks later, on the 7th of October, he went to the lane at the back of a house at 254 Gouger Street, where the caretaker of the Central Market, Joe West, lived. The time was 7:15 p.m. He yelled out, "Is that you, Joe West?" Joe went to the door, accompanied by his daughter, who had been going out with Wallace. When Joe replied it was, Wallace added, "Come down here and I'll drop you." Then Wallace fired a shot into the air from a pistol as West walked into the backyard. Wallace then went home to bed. Wallace was arrested in Grenfell Street the next morning. He said West had been knocking his daughter around, and he had fired into the air merely to frighten the other man. He also claimed he was drunk at the time. It was purely and simply the result of a drunken bout. I have nothing against West, and I did him no bodily harm. It's just what might happen to anyone. Wallace was again fined £2, but this time with £1 costs. An additional charge of vagrancy failed on the 14th of October. Police claimed Wallace did no legal work, but spent his time in the company of known criminals. Wallace countered by convincing the court that he had been clerking for bookmakers. The month wasn't even over before Wallace appeared in court again, on the 27th of October. 2 days earlier, it is alleged he stole £43 from a man named Arthur MacDonald. Wallace confidently stated, This is a private prosecution, and when Mr. MacDonald gets this notion out of his head, we will probably be friends again." Sure enough, on the 7th of November the charge was withdrawn, when MacDonald indicated he did not wish to proceed. His next run-in occurred at Comley's ham shop on King William Street between 10:30 and 11 p.m. on the night of the 25th of November 1924. He ordered 2 chicken wings and was told by the manager, James Henry, that he had been instructed not to serve him. In response, he swore and picked up a ham knife and said, "If you put it over me, I will stab you with this, you." The result was a bond to be of good behaviour for 6 months. In December, he was pursued for non-payment of car hire he had engaged in September, but did not appear in court. Maybe he had already quit Adelaide by this time, for he soon appeared causing trouble in Melbourne. On the 31st of January 1925, he was with another man and 2 women at 6:30 a.m. in Swanston Street, when he robbed the other man of £40 and a gold watch and chain. Wallace claimed when arrested that he had taken them from the other man for safety. Senior Constable Essler testified that he had known Wallace for 6 weeks and often had seen him around the streets at 3 a.m. When he saw him on the 5th of January, Essler had questioned what he was doing. Wallace had said he was waiting to travel with a consignment of horses to India in February, which was a complete fabrication. Detective White from Adelaide, who was on an exchange placement with Victorian police, said he had arrested Wallace for picking pockets at the Oakbank races at Easter 1924, and detailed his other misadventures in South Australia. Wallace admitted he had convictions in Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia and Western Australia. Wallace asked for leniency, saying that he had been sent to jail when he was 15 and never got a chance to reform. He claimed he was still only 21. He was sentenced to 6 months inside. Evidently he did not serve the full term, for on the 21st of April he assaulted Constable Taylor. Wallace, who said he was a motor mechanic, was released on bail and immediately fled to Queensland. Under the alias George Franklin, and stating that he was a professional turf advisor, on the 12th of May 1925 he was charged with loitering and was stealing a chequebook and bankbook. These were taken from a 61-year-old man named John Simmons in Queen Street, Brisbane. Wallace and 2 accomplices had approached, saying, "Hello, Bill, where have you been all the time?" Simmons replied, "I ain't been anywhere. I've never seen you. I don't know you," before he felt a tug in his pocket. 2 witnesses saw what was happening and told Wallace to leave the old man alone. Wallace punched Reginald Robinson, one of the young men who had come to the aid of Simmons. He had been discharged from a similar crime committed the day before he robbed Simmons, when an old farmer was tricked at a hotel with a scam known as "Who is Heavier" by 4 men. The group started a false argument about whether the victim, or one of them, was heavier, which led to the victim being picked up to determine their weight, during which their pockets were picked. Wallace's alibi for the 12th of May was that he was at a brothel south of the Brisbane River at the time. 4 of the women were subpoenaed to give evidence, but failed to convince the court. Wallace was sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment with hard labour. Almost as soon as he was out, he landed in Rockhampton, where during a fight on his first day there, 22nd of June 1925, he lost his hat, his head was cut open and his clothes destroyed. When he was arrested for creating a disturbance, obscene language and resisting arrest, he was ordered to pay £4 10 shillings or go back inside for another month. It was on the 24th of June that he was caught sneaking from room to room at the Normanby Hotel, looking for something to steal. He told the court he was a mechanic and had come to Rockhampton to go cane cutting. Police asked if he was a hotel barber, which he denied. They asked him if he knew what the term meant, and he replied that he did. Somebody who robbed hotels. The magistrate declared Wallace to be lazy and indolent and sent him to jail for 4 months with hard labour. On the night of the 13th of October 1925, 3 men robbed the Spring Hill home of George Titch Brett, or Brecht, a man with a colourful past himself. The violent robbery, which put Brett into hospital when he was clobbered with a beer bottle, only netted £6 8 shillings. Wallace was arrested at the Tingalpa Hotel on the 16th of October and taken to the hospital to be identified by Brett. Although Wallace was confident Titch would not point him out, he did, and added, "He's the one who hit me with the bottle." Edward Radley and John Phillips were also arrested in the case. Radley, the first arrested, calmly informed police, "You can go your hardest. Titch knows better than to go on with the business. Asked who had hit Brett with the bottle, Radley denied he had done it, but added, "Anyway, the bastard deserved it." Phillips was also confident of evading justice. He was heard to state, "Titch won't go on with us, because Murphy will pool him if he does." In court, Mary Ellen Brett, George's wife, claimed she couldn't remember what had happened. Asked if her memory was poor, she replied, "I was half in the horrors. I was arrested about 12 times in the month." Her husband apparently knew not to go on with them, for he failed twice to appear in court. After the second occasion, the defendants were discharged on the 5th of November. Wallace was arrested for theft of Bertie Talbot's wallet containing £59 at Tingalpa on the 17th of November, while the men were on a drinking spree. Again, when the case reached court, the complainant had changed his mind. Wallace was known to be in Sydney by January 1926, as he was one of a number of men caught drinking in a sly grog shop that month, but he seems to have kept a low profile until the following year. On the 18th of January 1927 he was refused service, so attempted to punch William Anderson, manager of the King's Cross Hotel in Darlinghurst. When the other man parried the blows, Wallace said, "If I can't hit you, I'll put a bullet through you," and pulled out a revolver, but was grabbed by 2 other men and held for police. On the 19th of May he bashed an ex-jockey named Oscar Short so badly he was confined to bed and hospitalisation was considered necessary. Short had the audacity to notice while drinking with Wallace that some of his money had been stolen, for which he was knocked down, hurled into a laneway and punched and kicked about the head. Amazingly, when he was required for the court case on the 26th of May, Oscar could not be located anywhere, and once more Wallace walked away from a failed prosecution, smiling. Once he founded a partnership with Norman Brune, Snowy Cutmore and Jack Hayes in Sydney in 1927. Public notice of his activities increased. This band of gents were some of the most notorious gangsters in Australia at the time, and became spoken of as the Unholy Three. They extorted money from sly groggers, dope traffickers, street women, burglars and any other denizens of the underworld they could shake down. Their activities in Sydney precipitated the so-called Razor Wars, which occurred between 1927 and 1932 between criminal factions. The Brisbane Truth newspaper in July of that year revealed Wallace, who was back in Queensland, was involved. Wallace appears to have been the main trendsetter of the use of the razor. Razors have been used in brawls and personal disputes as the weapon nearest to hand. The use of razors by gangsters was more calculated. Razors inflicted nasty, painful lacerations when wielded with intent, but the victim was unlikely to die, unlike if they were shot. The death penalty was likely to apply if someone died from a gunshot injury, but a razor cut would only incur some time in the Bluestone mansion. Fear of having one's face carved with a blade achieved the same result as a bullet. In addition, the New South Wales Pistol Licensing Act of 1927 provided for an automatic jail sentence for anyone possessing an unlicensed weapon. In Melbourne on the night of the 19th of November 1926, Wallace and an associate named Morgan Cameron attacked a man named Duncan Campbell in Little Lonsdale Street, knocking him to the ground. While he was there, Wallace slashed the man's throat with a razor. Campbell was taken to hospital where he received 27 stitches and remained in a serious condition for some weeks. Cameron was sentenced to 12 months while Wallace disappeared and wasn't arrested for the wounding until May 1928. It was around this time that his nickname of the Midnight Rapist was mentioned in newspapers. By this time the razor wars had erupted in Sydney between Wallace's group and men like Frank Green, working for organised crime figures Kate Lee and Tilly Devine, the 2 Madames of Mayhem in Sydney. Norman Brune had been shot dead in Charlotte Lane, Sydney in 1927, while Snowy Cutmore had taken bullets in Melbourne in the shootout that also ended the career of Melbourne notable Squizzy Taylor. Razor Jack Hayes was shot in 1928, not for the first time, but lived. It was not only razors which were employed. A man named Thomas Kelly was seen in a fight with Wallace in a street in July 1927, striking him with a claw hammer. In court, both men protested that nothing had happened, but were both fined £1 for riotous behaviour. Kelly was also said to be the man who had shot Jack Hayes shortly before this transaction. Wallace himself came close to death as a result of his activities. He had molested the woman friend of a tough crook and had appeared at the flat of two jewel thieves and at gunpoint took from them a sizable haul they had gotten away with. The next night he was walking up a dark lane when for some reason he suddenly stopped and backtracked. Perhaps some sixth sense told him there was danger ahead. There certainly was. At the other end of the lane 3 men waited with revolvers for him to come close enough to kill. Around 1928, one of Wallace's victims broke the code of the Underworld after being robbed and beaten by Wallace and another crook. The victim squealed and Wallace's accomplice was arrested and jailed. Wallace disappeared to Melbourne, where he continued holding up other criminals until he was shot. He fled again with his wife to Adelaide and then in August to Western Australia. New South Wales police made little effort to extradite him, more relieved he was out of their way. He'd been sentenced in October to 6 months for vagrancy in Perth anyhow. Stopping off back in Adelaide in June 1929, in full view of hundreds of other people, Wallace took out a table knife he had stolen earlier during a fight at Victoria Park Racecourse and attempted to stab Paddy Boyne in the back as the other man walked away, but the knife bent instead of piercing the intended victim. Naturally, the charge was withdrawn when Boyne failed to recall anything about the trifling incident. In August, Wallace returned to Compley's ham shop and renewed his feud with James Henry, who ordered him out of the shop. Wallace instead threw a salt shaker and abused customers before punching Henry. On the 17th of September, Wallace was living in Field Street, Adelaide, and was on his way home from a house on West Terrace, when at 4:15 a.m. somebody shot him. The bullet passed through the lapel of his coat, glanced off a rib, and ended near the left shoulder blade. He flagged down a passing motorist, Garnet Bierbeck, to take him from West Terrace to the Adelaide Hospital. Once the bullet was extracted, he went home. Police had attended an address at Nottage Terrace, Medindi, on the outskirts of the city 2 hours earlier, having had reports of 5 or 6 gunshots. They found the house had been disturbed. There were about a dozen men present, and they were told there had been a fight over a girl, and that it was fireworks, not gunfire, which had been heard. Police thought the two events connected, but nobody was forthcoming with information. Wallace recovered on his sickbed to attend court over the ham shop assault on the 8th of October 1929, when he was fined £20 with £25 costs. Unable to pay, he went to jail. Hearing that the man who squealed on him was himself now wanted by the police and vanished in smoke, Wallace returned to Sydney in 1931. It was predicted that he would not last long before one of a number of gunmen with a grievance against him found him. At least 2 men had vowed to shoot him on sight. Wallace was usually in a doped-up state, detested by most of the underworld, and had no real friends to rely on, yet seemed to have a charmed life. Through the 30s and 40s, Wallace kept himself busy with petty crime, eventually appearing before the courts 140 times by 1948. Around April 1948, Wallace arrived back in the Wildflower State. Between then and November, he renewed the acquaintance of a younger man named Leonard Herman Levy, 31 at the time. Levy had become acquainted with Wallace in the eastern states in about 1943. Levy and his brothers were locals who had managed to build up a criminal resume themselves. Leonard was first convicted of joyriding and stolen cars in 1935, when he was 18. The following year, he and his brother Donald broke into a kiosk and stole tobacco. By 1941, Levy had been in the military, including spending time in the Fremantle military prison. He was now 24 and was living the life of a pimp. His girl was a woman named Jean Violet Stewart, who wrote a letter to Levy, which was used in court in a failed bid to convict him. It was found when Levy's room in a brothel was searched. It read, "My darling Len, I am so sorry you are going to get 14 days. It is too long to be away from you. I do love you, darling. I'll be fair to you. If I go out with another man, it will only be for business. I meant to leave you money for cigarettes the other night, but being so drunk I forgot. My eye is getting all right, and then I'll get my photo taken. I love you and am very jealous, and it hurt me very much when you lay on Gladys's bed the other night. Kiss, 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 Jean." Levy still cut a youthful and stylish figure in smart suits in 1948. Then working as a miner at Norseman, he had been sentenced to 6 months' jail for failing to pay child maintenance in April of that year. Wallace was in trouble in early July for using the alias William Clarence Harris. He had been recognised drinking with criminals and prostitutes. He said he used the name and got a job as a salesman because he wanted to start a new life. When asked if he was peddling cocaine in Perth, he said, "No, that's not right. I turned that game up years ago." Instead, he was sent to jail for a month. Levy got to know what kind of a man Wallace was when he found £5 missing on the 1st of November. Nevertheless, the two spent a lot of time together drinking and playing cards. Then on the 22nd of November, the two had been at a house in West Perth, drinking. When Levy awoke, he found £140 missing from a bag pinned to the waistband of his trousers. At about 11 p.m. on the 22nd of November, Levy entered the European Club, a small dive at the corner of James and Lake Street in Perth, and spoke to the proprietor, Giuseppe Agresta. He mentioned something about betting on the highest card. Agresta said any betting was done for drinks and not money. Levy then left. Agresta later noticed two men on the street corner outside talking, who he thought were Levy and Wallace, but he couldn't be sure. Wallace then went to the European Club at about midnight. With him was Leonard Herman Levy. They asked for something to eat, but were told there was nothing available. Wallace asked Levy for a drink, so Levy took a bottle from his coat pocket. Levy demanded that Wallace return the money he had stolen. Wallace told him, "Get out, you dirty mug." Wallace then walked off to use the lavatory. Levy grabbed a knife from the club and followed Wallace. Levy claimed Wallace went for a gun in his pocket, saying, "Now I'll fix you." At about 1 a.m. on the 23rd of November 1948, Levy lunged and stabbed Wallace with a 9-inch meat knife. He claimed he did it to protect himself. Wallace was stabbed 3 times, twice in the left side, one in the chest which penetrated his lung, and the second in the stomach which didn't penetrate the 7 inches of fat there, and a deep gash in his upper left arm. Agresta heard a noise and heard Wallace say, "You hit me." Levy emerged carrying the knife which he dropped on the floor and ran out. Wallace staggered out of the toilet and asked for a towel to staunch the flow of blood and a taxi to take him to hospital. He received blood transfusions and was operated on, and his condition was considered fair. Police attempted to interview Wallace in the hospital, but although he talked, he refused to sign a statement. 2 days later he developed pneumonia, and the drugs used to treat it had a bad effect on existing medical conditions he had. He remained in hospital, his condition improving, until his health suddenly took a turn for the worst, and at 6:30 a.m. on the 7th of December 1948, George Wallace died at the age of 45. He had been due for discharge when he died, and had at his own risk even left the hospital for a few hours on the 4th of December. An autopsy found dermatitis and hepatitis, aggravated by the wounding, had caused his death. Wallace also had late-stage VD, and penicillin used to treat him was deemed to have had a detrimental effect. He was buried the next day at Karrakatta Cemetery. No mourners came to see George off. Apart from burial officials, the only person to witness the oversized coffin lowered into the earth was a solitary detective. Meanwhile, the hunt for Levy continued. He had stayed in Perth for 10 days, growing a moustache, and then caught a train to Adelaide, and from there flew to Melbourne. He was arrested there on the 17th of December 1948. He was returned to Perth on the 27th of December and charged with murder. The trial took place in early February. Levy claimed he had only intended to king-hit Wallace and then kick him in the guts. He said Wallace was a massively built man and he would not be able to best him in a fistfight, which is why he had the knife for protection. On the 9th of February, Levy was found guilty after a 45-minute retirement by the jury. He went ashen as the decision was announced. Judge Dwyer then sentenced Levy to be hanged by the neck until dead. He was taken to the condemned cell at Fremantle Prison. Levy appealed the sentence, but this was rejected on the 8th of March. However, 10 days later, the Executive Council of State Parliament commuted the sentence to one of life imprisonment with hard labour. An appeal to the High Court of Australia in September 1949 failed as well, and Levy remained behind bars. In March 1950, Levy was joined by his younger brother Max, who was jailed for his part in stealing £85. Leonard Levy died in Perth on the 25th of October 1993 at the age of 76, 1 year and 3 days after Max died aged 69. Leonard left a wife, 5 children and many grandchildren. On George Wallace's page on the Find a Grave website, he is still left flowers to this day, although his era and his story have faded into the dark corners of history.